Good afternoon, everyone. iTech welcomes all the participants for today's National Distance Learning Seminar Series. The topic of today's session is Understanding Vulnerabilities of Transgender Community in India, and it is our pleasure to have Ms. Abhina Aher with us, who is the Associate Director, Gender, Sexuality and Rights with India HIV/AIDS Alliance. Abhina is a transgender woman from Hijra community who is working as a global trans activist and is involved with various community networks such as Asia Pacific Transgender Network, Innovative Responses for Global Transgender on HIV, and International Trans Fund. We welcome you, Abhina, for today's NDLS session. I would request you to kindly take over the session.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, great, fantastic. Thank you so much for the technical fault. I'll just start the process. Hi, thank you so much for introducing, and I'll be talking about unmet needs of transgender people. We all work with various community who's been affected by HIV, and while we were working with all the key population, one of the prominent key population that we work with is transgender women, and who are these people and how do we want to work with them, what are the issues and structural barriers that we come across while we were providing services to them, is something that we are going to talk about it. As you know that as a part of larger sustainable development goal 3, we have to ensure health and well-being for all people. When we talk about all the people, we must include all the vulnerable communities, because countries like India, when we talk about HIV, the vulnerabilities of HIV is centric around key populations, and transgender people are on the second rank when it comes to the HIV vulnerability, immediately after the people who inject drugs. Now we need to understand the world of transgender people, because many times we get into a discussions and debate about who are these people, how many people are there, whom are we reaching to, and where are these people. We end up getting various sorts of estimates when it comes to the transgender population in India. One of the prominent perspective is that there are floating estimates within India at the various level. The early mapping which was done by UNDP with the help of civil society member talked about almost 19 to 25 lakhs of transgender people who are there in India, with whom we need to work around with that. And over the period of time, we have evolved on various numbers when it comes to the transgender people in India. But across the globe, when we look into the real numbers of transgender people, almost 19% of transgender population reside in Asia Pacific. And one of the prominent scientific methods to understand what would be the amount of population which is there at this point of time who are identified as transgenders, there is almost 0.1% to 1.1% populations who from the sexual reproductive age who identify themselves as transgender people. And we can look into the perspective of India itself, because we are talking about the country with 132 crore population. And in even in the cities like Delhi, when we have almost estimate of 9 lakh population, you can understand the how many people do identify themselves as transgender people. But when we actually look into perspective of India, the last census that we have had in 2011, we have just got the tip of the iceberg. Like for example, the census of India in 2011 is estimated around 4.9 million transgender population. But surprisingly, around 55,000 also identified as children who are between 0 to 6 age group, and this data is available in internet also, you can have a look at it, which was self-reported transgender children. And that's a kind of scientific universe that we have. But all the transgender community, civil society members think that this is just a tip of icebergs, and it's a huge amount of population that we have, which we have not been able to reach out yet. um, when we talk about the transgender, there are a lot of evidences that are there from the traditional mythologies. and various aspect about the transgender people. Like for example, if you look our ancient scripts, you there are so many evidences. Like for example, combination of Shiva and Parvati, which is a half man and a half woman, statue, which is also a statue of a god of a dance, which we all worship. And we never question about that. Why would we have a statue of half man and half woman? Because they are all gods and they are permissible about it. And Ardhanari Nateshwara is a very prominent figure which talks about the combination of man and a woman in the same body. It's like a srushti and a power which comes to the perspective. The other evidence that I want to quickly talk about, the Lord Arjuna, which is supposed to be the epitome of manhood, and he's a god of archery, and he's a perfect man that we talk about it. But when he's supposed to disguise himself during a year of exile, he actually portrays himself as a transgender woman called as Brahmanala, who is teaching dance to Urvashi. And Brihanala is not somebody who's actually somebody who's begging on the streets, or who's doing some sort of a sex work or something. Like Brihanala is a teacher. So as you know, at that point of time, also the trans person who was portrayed within the sculptures were also somebody who was at the guru level, who is part of the Gurukul Parampara, and she is supposed to be worshipped, and somebody who should be respected. So there was a huge amount of respect which was there. Shikhandi is another character that you must understand from Mahabharata. If Shikhandi wouldn't have been there, which is a reincarnation of Amba, who is supposed to be a woman who's transitioned as a man, female transition as a man, if that character is not there, Mahabharata would have never stopped. She's the one epitome character who has actually transformed the entire Mahabharata perspective. And we talk about it that India is the only country, when we talk about it, that there are temples and rituals and culture that are specifically about the third gender, transgender people. So like if you go to Gujarat in Maisana, you will find a temple of a Bahucharama. Now in the Bahucharama temple, there are priests also transgenders, and there are all the mainstream society people also over there. They go and they do lot of prayers and all those kind of things also. So that also happens when it comes. There's a lot of respect that these people get over there. When we talk about the transgender people, we need to understand who are these people when we talk about it, because many times when we talk about the transgender people only understand transgender people as somebody who's a hijra, and not any other gender identity that we come across. So transgender is basically a bigger umbrella when we talk about it. It is a gender perspective, and there are several different identities that like for example Mangalmukhi, Jogti, Jogappa, Shiva Shakti, all those different kind of population that we have that are called as transgender people. What you need to understand, that transgender identity is a gender expression. However, when we talk about the birth of a baby, you can either be born as a male, or you can be either born as a female with some amount of chromosomal combinations. And if there's an ambiguous genitalia, the individual or the baby who's born with that person is called as intersex person. Now that person may not be prominently called as a transgender person, because now there's a global movement which is happening, which talks about intersex to be considered as a completely different kind of a community, which needs to be addressed. Their issues are different. Their issues are much more to do with the biological body transformation. But when we talk about the transgender people, their issues are more focused around gender expressions. So at the global level also, when we talk about intersex people, there is a separate movement which is happening. Now what happens over here is that when we talk about transgender people in India, and many times when people don't know about transgender people, all of them feel that all the transgender people are intersex, which is a wrong perspective. All transgender people are not intersex. Some intersex people may identify themselves as a transgender people as well. So we have to understand the perspective of that. One, is due to the gender expression. The other issue is about genital abnormality, which is caused during the time of birth. And there's a huge amount of work which is happening about depathologizations about these individuals, because many times such babies go through early medical transitions, and many times that's against their will. Like for example, the doctors decide and the parent decide what sex the baby should have, and that is not something which is advisable. In the intersex movement, it has been talked about is that unless and until the baby is not 18 years of age, no surgeries should be made on the baby to have a genital corrections. So those are the other things that being talked about when it comes to the intersex movement. So many times there is a huge amount of population who identify themselves as a trapped within the wrong body, and a lot of people would ask me at what time I would understand that am I transgender, so I'm not a transgender person. So fact remains is there is no age to understand when the person, it all depends upon the individual decision about at what time or what year of the stage you would understand yourself as somebody who's trapped into the wrong body. For me, as a trans woman, I identified myself as the age or at early age around 6 to 7 years, when I started cross-dressing myself without anybody telling anything about it. So this is a bigger umbrella that I was talking to you about. There are various identities that you can see. One of the identities is called as a hijra, which is the socio-ethnic identity, where you have the Guru Chela Parampara. It's a completely separate, identical, parallel family structures where you have a guru, chela, parampara. Like many times when young transgender people who run away from their house because their families don't understand, or their family refuse them, or their families throw them out of their house, they have nowhere to go, and at that point of time they identify a guru and they become part of that another family, which is not a blood family but a parallel family, which gives them shelter, food, and also opportunities for um, survival. When we talk about that, many of these hijras are into a traditional businesses called as a badhai, which means that you are supposed to go to on a happy occasions to other people, you sing, you dance, and you collect some sort of a gifts and money, and it's a traditional business that has been going on for a longest period of time. Then when you talk about different parts of country, different people are called with the different identities. Like there is another identity where people, the trans people, get married to a god, a deity, or any, like for example Yallamma, or any other goddess or god, and those people are devotees of those gods and goddesses, and they are called as Jogti, Mangalmukhi, Shiva Shakti, Jogappa. These are the various identity that in India construct about that. Then the other identity is also called as Aravani. So if you go to the South India, there are a lot of people who identify themselves as Aravani, which is not a Hijra identity as such, but it's a different identity altogether. A lot of us don't know that just like there's a transformation from male sex to a woman gender is called as a trans woman, or all these identities that I talked about. There is also a different kind of a journey that a person can go through, where a person could born with the female genitalia, female sex, and over the period of time transition, that person himself or herself as a trans man and trans. I hope now you guys can hear me. Okay, great. So I think people can hear me, and I'm gonna start over again. So that these are the different identities that I'm talking about here, and I spoke to them a little bit at this point of time. So I was okay. Somebody is saying that I could repeat myself. So I'm saying is that transgender is a bigger umbrella, and there's a huge amount of different identities that you see it across in this umbrellas, and there are certain identities that I'm going to talk about it right now. So hijras and kinnars, and these are the identities which is a socio-ethnic identity, and they have a guru chela parampara. They have a different culture altogether. All the children who identify themselves as a hijra, they run away from their house and they go to this other parallel family structures where they would get a support, they would get money, the earning opportunities, and at the same time shelter, and that's how they go around with that. Trans women, who somebody who's transitioned themselves from male sex to a woman gender. Trans man, the similar way, transition themselves from a female sex to a man, a male gender. Aravani, Mangalmukhi, Shiva Shakti, Jogappa, these are the various individuals that are there, and intersex people that we talked about, which has an issue about with specifically about at the time of birth. Now we talk about the issues of transgender people, but before that, I just want to touch base about the HIV vulnerability of transgender people in India. Right now, when we talk about HIV vulnerability of transgender people, within the key population, the highest HIV vulnerability that we identify is with people who injecting drugs, which is almost like 9.5%. And in transgenders, the HIV vulnerability is around 7.4%, which is extremely high amount of HIV vulnerability. And why these people are vulnerable for HIV is something that we are going to discuss right now. And what are the other larger aspects that contribute to their vulnerabilities towards HIV is something that we are going to discuss right now. So the first thing that I want to talk about it is gender-based violence. And when we talk about violence, the violence is not only about the physical. The violence is about verbal, social, sexual, psychological. All these violences can contribute. So, like for example, if a person like me who's a trans woman who comes to your ART centers, and if you identify and address that person as sir, that is also a big insult for me, because you have to ask me about what how I would like to pronounce myself, and I would answer to you that I would like to pronounce myself as she. You have to identify myself as she. Many times lot of transgender people don't go to the ART centers, don't go to the healthcare services, because they do not feel respected over there. They do not feel that healthcare providers are enough providing compassion toward them, and they do not understand their gender affirmation issues. What do you mean by gender affirmation? Gender affirmation is mean that we ask another person, whoever that person is, man, woman, or a trans person, is that how would you like me to address you, rather than presuming what we would like to address me. So just because you would see me with the male voice, you would identify me as sir, is something which will be extremely disrespectful for me. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about it is about violence. You see the evidences which is shown by the ICMRW, survey which was done in Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Bhutan. You say these are the perpetrators of violence. These are the areas of violence where these people are being more discriminated. That includes healthcare providers, religious institutions, communities, school, workplace, family, intimate partners, first sexual encounter, and mainly with the police, the law enforcement agency. But one of the prominent area where individuals feel discriminated is healthcare, is something which I want to make highlight to you. Now, there's another evidence which talks about it, that so who are the perpetrators of violence? Who are the one who caused the major violence to the transgender people? And it is surprisingly, you will see in this result, and this is specifically study done by Swasti in India, the major violence that comes to the transgender people is through strangers. The strangers, people who doesn't know you, then your sexual client, your boyfriend or your boyfriend or partners, and others. So there is a huge amount of violence that these people feel, and there are different sides of perpetrator of violence that go through it. Now here in this light, what you see is the next advancement of the violence cases. So at different ages of life, what different emotions a trans person would go through. So like for example, when we talk about the childhood, the issues of the trans people would be about the not being able to understand the complexities of his gender expression or her gender expression, having a tremendous amount of family pressure and huge amount of gossip that happens in the society. And I remember in my early age when I was in school, I used to wait till the recess happens, so that till the recess get over to go to washroom. Because when I used to go to washrooms, in the male washroom, lot of people used to try to strip my pant, or would try to say all the bad words to me. So I used to feel extremely threatened because I was extremely effeminate. when I was in the school, and lot of children face that kind of problem. Now look back to the data that the census talks about. In 2011, there are 55,000 of transgender who have been identified as transgender children or gender variant children, and these people must be going through this kind of issues. And that issue starts from there and it remains throughout your life. So once you come to an adolescence age, there is huge amount of population who drop out from the school because there are no support at the school level. There is no gender protection. There is no gender protection support. Sexuality in gender is not being talked about enough. The only thing that get discussed in the educational institutions is good touch and bad touch, and many times that is not sufficient for transgender people. And all our kids do get information about sexuality, gender, or about sex through all the different sort of channels. Right now internet is all over. Children are getting exposed to the internet quite easy. Many times we are not comfortable, or we don't know enough about sexuality and gender, and that also creates a barrier for um, uh, you know young people who identify themselves differently or have a different preference becomes more vulnerable. When they reach to the adulthood, many times there's huge amount of harassment, abuse. There's economic insecurity because they leave their houses. Many times people are get thrown out from their own properties. They don't get their own property rights. Many times their sisters and brothers exclude them from the property right because they feel that you are a transgender person, you are not going to get married, you are not going to have a children, why do you need a property? So that's the other issue that people face. Now when we talk about the killing of transgender people, many times these killings are not been reported enough. So many times even after a trans person dies, his body is been identified as a man or a woman. So if I'm gone through a gender transition and if I have a vagina, I will be reported as a woman in the police diary. And if I'm not gone through a gender transition, I will be reported as a man. And if I'm castrated, I'll be reported as maybe other or a man or whatever that police understands to me. So we do not have a real numbers of killing, but as you say, the killing of transgenders are happening every day. Every day this killing is increasing. Disconnect हो गया था. Every day हो गया था. Every day killing of transgender people is increasing. Unfortunately, we do not have a real data, and lot of not only killing, but there's a huge amount of hate crime. Hate crime is something where you hit a person. So many times actually there is a huge amount of hate crime which happens with the transgender people, and huge amount of suicide also takes place when we talk about the transgender people, because a lot of transgenders cannot deal with their sexual issues and gender identifications, and they cannot take the hate and the discrimination from the society. There's a huge amount of transgender people who are unemployed and dependent on sex work. We did a survey in 2012 under our program called as Pehchan, which was the largest global fund program, and almost 87% of transgender women reported they are dependent on a sex work, and almost 37% of transgender people reported they were at least 12th pass, which means there is an education among the transgender people, but because of the discrimination, because there are no health support policies, there are no HR policies which are conducive, there are no reservation for transgenders, the huge amount of population who are unemployed, and most of their survival is dependent on sex work. So HIV vulnerabilities, I have talked to you about that. 7.4% is something that we have right now with the transgender women, and they are facing a lot of issues. The global data says that at almost in urban cities, this HIV positivity could go up to 40%. This is a global data again, but that's the kind of HIV positivity that we can talk about it. Besides HIV positive, there are a lot of other SRHR issues, especially on STI. The other bigger issue is that all these transgender people prefer to go through a gender transition surgeries, and at this point of time, none of our hospitals, none of our healthcare providers are providing them free of cost or safer healthcare facility. Even hormone treatment is not something which has been prescribed in various healthcare systems. So a lot of these individuals depend on pregnancy pills to derive the estrogen, and that is something which is a major. So self hormone intake is something which has been affecting very badly, and it has a huge amount of side effects on the body of transgender people. So a lot of transgender people would have an issue when they are living with HIV. They are also having ARV, and they are also taking hormone treatment. So that could be another level of issue that these transgender people could face. Sorry, the table is not so clear, but this talks about the literacy rate among the transgender people of various important cities or states of India. And you can say, you can identify your state also over here, and you can see there are a lot of people who are literate as per the standards of nation. But despite of being literate, these people are not part of the employment or a skill building program. We talk about Make in India, we talk about various other initiatives that we are talking about it, but many times these individuals do not get enough opportunities to be part of these programs, and they do not get included. So despite of literacy, they are still left out for a begging and sex work. This is another data that I was talking to you about, which we have done it under the our Pehchan program, and which talks about is that how the issue of survival of the young transgender people are extremely difficult, and at the same time the transgender people who reach to an old age, who cannot walk, who cannot go for a begging or cannot go for a sex work, they also die a very pathetic kind of a life. Lot of transgenders do not come out as HIV positive people because of the discrimination and because of the double stigma within the community. So if they come out within the community that they are HIV positive, even their community, even their transgender community can disown them, and that's the fear that they have, and most of them do not come out as that. A lot of people don't even have a basic facilities like bank accounts. They do not have facility like social welfare schemes. Many of their documents are identified as a male, and that's not identified as a trans women. At the same time, they struggle a lot of issue on having a gender marker document as per their preference of gender. There's a huge amount of issue when it comes to acceptance of family and society. You can say that is, as per our 2012 2010 research, we found out that almost 50% of transgender people are not accepted from their own families, and we have to really understand what would be happening to them, what would be their issues, and because of this also their HIV vulnerability increases. At the early age of 14 years, 15 years, 16 years, 13 years, trans people are thrown out of their own houses, and that's the reason why they are left out to become having more HIV vulnerability. Um, so we are talking about policy change. Fortunately, we have got such a progressive bill, which we have got such a progressive announcement by or a verdict by the Supreme Court, the highest court of India, on 15th April 2014, which was which acknowledged them as a third gender, and after that there was also a private bill which was introduced, but still we have not got any bill or a law which is extremely favoring to the transgender people. Last week again social welfare ministry has launched a bill of 2019 transgender welfare, and this bill is right now into the discussion in Parliament, but there are a lot of other issues that the bill is getting discussed about screening committee. So the transgender people did not wanted to have a screening committee. At the same time, they wanted to have a reservation. They wanted to protect the children who are transgender people, and also wanted to have a gender neutral law for punishment towards a rape and abuse against the transgender people, which is not being provided support over there. Um, so which are the areas that we could need to focus when we talk about the transgender people? And I will talk about it broader, and then I will come more closer to our work which is happening with Vihan AIT centers and all those kind of things. So the first important thing is that if you are working with transgender people, I understand they could be living with HIV, and I understand that we have to talk about ARV, but at the same time, we also have to give them some support for gender transition. So all the whatever way our doctors can get sensitized about what are the issues of gender transition of transgender people and provide the support to these transgender people, including hormone treatment, surgeries. Right now, there are very limited facilities available in the government hospital for gender transition surgeries, which can be provided. They still don't have skill development. Educational support is very poor. Young transgender people are almost vulnerable, and we do not have enough counseling on gender and sexuality, because ourselves as health worker also we don't understand enough on sexuality and gender issues. There's a huge amount of issue related to housing and shelter. The cost of living for transgender people is almost 3 times higher. So, for example, you as a general person may be able to get housing or rented house very easily. But when we talk about the transgender people, lot of people don't want transgender people into their neighborhood. As a result of that, they do not get enough easy access to safe housing, shelter, and that is also a bigger issue. A lot of transgender people who are on ART or living with HIV also, if they get thrown out from their communities, they face a huge amount of issue on the shelter. Violence I talked to you about extensively, which is not been addressed at this point of time. We still don't have a social welfare board for transgender people. I understand under the HAN program, we are providing a lot of support to the key population on social welfare. When we are doing, we can actually do something that, for example, we can help them to connect with the social welfare schemes also. Employment skill building is something which we can work with them, we can support them in that perspective. Social welfare scheme that we can talk about it. But when we talk about Vihan program, or when we talk about hospitals, or when we talk about healthcare, or when we talk about ART centers, let's talk about what we can do within those ART centers to actually support transgender people. So some of the things that I talked to you earlier also, like for example, if you are having a transgender person who's your client in your ART centers or Vihan center, please make sure that you invest on gender affirmation, which means that when such client comes to you, please, before you judge that client, please ask that client how that person wants to be identified, whether that person want to be identified as he, whether that person identified as a she. They may have any name written on their birth document, which they will get it, which could be their Aadhaar card or anything, but they may not relate with that name. So, like for example, their Aadhaar card would say Prakash XYZ, and but if you really ask them, so what should I call you? What name I should use for you? They may say that I want you to call me as Priya. So even if you, that basic thing, if you give them, that will really help them to have faith in you, that okay, this healthcare provider really understand me. Second is that many of these transgender people come from long way, and they do not have enough time because they have to go for a sex work immediately after they take medication or counseling from you. And in the ART centers, in the hospitals, many times we do not have a separate line for them. So if it is possible for transgender people, if you can have a separate space where they can access the facility easily, it would be helpful. Lot of transgender people would come with you with the opportunistic infection, which includes STI and other related things. In our ART centers, in our STI centers, in our ICTC centers, many times we do not have a separate enclosure. We have to make sure, that is, we have to have a separate enclosure if a person wants to go through a body examination in private. I understand there are a lot of trainee doctors who would like to see and come and see a body of a transgender person, but you have to ask for a permission from that client first. That is it okay if other doctors, other medical professionals, other counselors can be part of this session? Please ask from that client, which is extremely important. Fourth thing is that you need to be aware about gender and sexuality issue. I have just talked to you about on the gender issue, but you may have a lot of people who would come with the sexuality issues. Like for example, I have talked to you about the gender expression today. So a person may identify that. himself or herself as a trans woman, trans man, Hijra, Jyoti, Mangalmukhi, Shiva Shakti. That does not mean that person is having a sexual act which you are anticipating. Sexuality and gender expression are the two different things which we need to understand. So, like for example, a transgender person coming to you probably maybe because of the family pressure married to a cis woman also possible. A transgender person may be having sex with a straight man. A transgender person may be having sexual activity with other transgender person. So the basic thing that you need to ask when you are taking sexual history of a client is that you don't judge the client. You don't make faces, you don't make any judgment on the person saying that, oh, you do this, you behave like that. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do something like that. So those are the things that we have to talk about it. When we talk about a trans person coming to the ART centers, you have to invest some amount of time talking about the social life, not just about this is your medication and go away. You have to invest on that trans person so that trans person invest on you back. That person feels home to come back, take the ART medication, take for your counseling. We have to do something beyond that, and that is something which you all can do. Being a friend of trans person will not make you a trans person. So we have to first look inside our heart and reduce and lose on our guilt which is there of relating people. Lot of transgender people, a lot of state people or healthcare providers feel guilt, shame or fear while they are relating to the transgender people, and none of these few people should have. You have to treat that person as your client, irrespective of whether that person is a male, female or a transgender person. You have to give them equal amount of respect and equal amount of privilege. Now, these are some of the cases that I wanted to discuss with you where a trans man, trans women have really gone far in their life and they have made a mark. Like, for example, we talk about this person called as Lalit Salve from Maharashtra. He became a police officer. He was born as a female sex, and over the period of time, he transitioned himself as a transgender man. And right now, he into the law enforcement agency. Then on the right hand side, you have Pratika. Pratika Yashini is again from I think Karnataka if I'm not mistaken. And initially she was refused for appearing for examination for IPS officer, and she fought a case. She she actually appeared in the exam. She passed the exam, and right now she is working as a law enforcement officer. Naina Udupi, again a very close friend of mine. She's working in Karnataka in the IT sector. She's a software engineer, and she's an amazing woman who's providing a lot of support and shelter to a lot of transgender people. There was an initiative which was done by in Kochi where a lot of trans people were identified as ticket collectors in metro, which is running. It was a good example of the employment of transgender people, and in our ART centers also we have to identify what role we can give them and how can we make them involved. Trans people are right now getting married. They are trying to ask for their civil rights. They are getting married to the man they love, and they are having a similar family relationship and bonding. Recently, the first Padma Shri was given to Nartaki Nataraj. She is from again South, and she's a classical Bharatanatyam dancer who's been practicing for last 20 years. For the first time, she has been awarded. So why am I showing you these examples? Because these examples are prominent examples saying that is we have to talk about inclusion. We have to talk about inclusion of transgender people in health also, and they are not just about our clients or beneficiary, but they can be our partner in providing health. The other slide that we talk about is that Anjali Lama, again a Lakme fashion model. She is part of the Vogue magazine right now. If you read the latest Vogue magazine, she is featured into the Vogue magazine where all the Bollywood stars appear. This is in Maharashtra, another cafe restaurant which is run by transgender people where all the serving people are transgender people and management are also transgender people. We have done healthcare providers training for transgender people in Alliance India, where we tried to through Vivo Healthcare, we tried to train a lot of transgender people over here on healthcare, giving first aid support to the people who are into emergency situations. And again, who can forget the Vicks ad? All the lot of transgender, including me, have raised a heterosexual child, and that doesn't mean that we have made them all transgenders. There's a huge amount of myths and misconception about transgender community, that one trans person can make a normal person a transgender person. Again, it's a big myth. There is a huge myth about the transgender people take away children. There is another myth about transgender people forcefully castrate people. All these are just myths and misconceptions that people are having. Again, in all the communities, there are different kind of people. Like your five fingers are not the same. Again, in our community also of transgender people, there will be good people, bad people. Good people are doing good work, and bad people are doing bad work, and bad people have to be punished for bad things, but good people also has to be encouraged more than enough to tell them that they are worth of having this life, because a lot of transgender people live their life with huge amount of guilt and shame. We are right now a bigger community. Our lives matter, our health matters. Trans health is our right at this point of time, and all the transgender people who are there, who are affected, who are living with HIV, the trans people who are not living with HIV but as a part of trans community, they need your support. They are already united and they are already working around. All these issues that I talked to you about will refrain them from accessing health, will refrain them from actually reaching to the ART centers, reaching to the Vihan centers and accessing health. But what you can do is that invest an additional time with them, understanding issues, and then finding out opportunities to engage with them so that you can provide them support. So this was a small presentation that I did. I hope you like the presentation. We have some time. I would encourage, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. You can type it out. I think Pravit has already written in the chat box. Please write down in the chat box. If I can't answer the question right now, you can reach out to me on the email. My email address is aaher@allianceindia.org, and my mobile number is 9711170763, and I'm happy to actually answer your questions now and later also. So I'm happy to do that. I've got one question which says that, do you feel we need to appeal NACO include transgenders in the ART logo? Absolutely, I agree. Right now, in some of the states, I don't want to name any state, but I was recently part of one of the TSU review, and I found out that in the entire state, NACO is not, we are not capturing the TG data in our TI, which is I felt was extremely shocking, because a lot of times transgenders are included as male or called as men who have sex with men. We are not men who have sex with men. We are transgender people, and our data and our presence and our visibility should be mentioned separately. Yes, we must have. There is some IC material on transgender people with NACO. I would encourage you to reach out to NACO and write to them, ask them. We have some materials that we at Alliance India has developed recently on transgenders PrEP demand. So transgender people demanding for PrEP. But yes, we must have. There are a lot of transgender people who are open and out living with HIV. Um there are a lot of transgender people who are out and open living with HIV, and I think they should be included on ART logo. Yes, absolutely, and we are also developing some IC material for transgender people, and I can promise that very soon we will be able to submit it to you. So there are a lot of people like Amruta Soni from Bihar. She's living with HIV. She's out and open. So just like that, Nuri Amma works with children living with HIV. She's from Tamil Nadu. She's out and open living with HIV, a very proud person. So like that, so many people are there and who are living with HIV and working. Okay, what are the rights of TG? The same rights that you and me can have. Uh, um, all the rights that you and me should have as a human being, same rights has to be given to the transgender people. But the unfortunate part is that the transgender people are not even being counted. The transgender people are being considered as a transparent glass. So many times when we talk about transgender people, we don't know whom we are talking about. As a doctors also, as a healthcare providers also, none of our curriculum talks about the transgender people. So a lot of doctors may not know if a trans person will get undressed, what will they see? What will they see? And what should they be scared of? What would be the anatomy of transgender person? What are the different anatomy? We don't get that kind of a training. We don't get that kind of an education. And that is the reason why a lot of doctors and healthcare providers actually put transgender people as a distance when they give medication. They don't even touch them. They don't even hug them. And there's nothing wrong with that. Trans people are also human beings and they deserve all the right. They deserve right of education, right of employment, right of health, right of hold a property, right of getting married, right of adopting children, everything that any other individual would have. The similar kind of rights the trans people must have, and we all should make sure that they have those kind of rights, because we are talking about sabka saath and sabka vikas. We are talking about equal rights, equal citizens, and they are also equal citizens that we have. And it's a huge amount of population that we are talking about. 1% of and we are like we are sexually reproductive country. 60% of our population is youth. So even if we talk about, say, around maybe I don't know, 60 70 lakhs, even 1% of that is like huge amount of population that is not being talked about. Their health is not being talked about enough. Their social rights have been not talked about enough. Things are moving but not happening faster enough. So right now there is a TG bill which is happening in Parliament, but within that TG bill also they are not talking about reservations. They are not talking about healthcare. Why am I talking about reservations? Like for example, if I get admitted today, if I get a heart attack and if I get admitted, where will you admit me? Will you admit me into a male ward or a female ward? And the answer is we don't know. Because I'm wearing sari, probably you would like to put me into the female ward, but females would be uncomfortable about it. And then you would, because my ID proof says my male name, you would like to put me into the male ward, but I would not be comfortable in a male ward. So we need to have a special provisions within the healthcare for transgender people also. There is a huge amount of gaps when he talks about the transgender people healthcare. Like for example, we still don't have a data on trans people who are affected by TB. We don't have enough data of trans people affected by viral hepatitis. We don't have data on trans people who die because of the complexities of gender transition within the SRHR. All those issues are extremely important, and when we actually treat them for ART, or when we actually give them counseling, we all must take care of all these important aspects that we have been ignorant about. I think we are not doing enough to search this information and understanding. And believe me, issues of transgenders are not at the bay, they are at your face now, because transgender people are coming to your hospitals and they are getting treatment. What about the marriage? Yes, love sabko chahiye. Everybody needs love. Marriage, yes. Right now in Chhattisgarh, 15 transgenders tried to do a samuhik vivaha, where they married to a person whom they love. There are so many transgender people who are living with their partners. Right now, as per the civil rights, they are not getting any certificates. But recently, I read somewhere that as per the Hindu Marriage Act, there is recognition which has been given to the transgender people to them to marry the partner that they want to marry. I have no record of any trans people who are married to a man or a woman or anybody has got a certificate in that regard. But yes, it is in the matter of progress, and right now, after the TG bill gets sanctioned, I'm sure a lot of trans people will talk about their basic civil rights which has been ignored. Stigma and discrimination. Thank you, Dr. Swami. It's talking about Mysuru. Stigma and discrimination. How to eliminate? Yes, So very nice question, Dr. Swami. Thank you so much for asking this question. Thank you also, Dr. St. John, for asking the question about marriage. Um, Stigma discrimination can be eliminated once we get more education about transgender people. If you start identifying themselves as a normal human being, the stigma of transgender people will get reduced. If you include them within the healthcare provisions, the stigma of transgender people would get discrimination will eliminate. If you start not treating trans people as just a client but as somebody who's equal partner of the health response, the stigma will reduce further. If you create policies within your ART centers, within your healthcare system, that will say that no discrimination is allowed against any person including trans person, that will make a lot of difference. And this all things are possible, this all things can be done. We just have to take a leadership in that regard. Another question I'm having, how can we include education about transgender people into? That's a very brilliant question. Thank you so much whoever has asked the question. I think Divya is asking the question. Thank you, Divya. So yes, first thing first is that we are having a major gap, Divya, at this point of time about trans people who are left out on their education. We need to create system for transgender people to go back to the education. There are a lot of trans people who want to go back to the education and complete their education. We tried to do this with IGNOU and open universities, but I don't think so their admin teams are supportive enough. So it was done and then it was forgotten. In Delhi also, still we are facing a lot of issues for trans people who are, so in Delhi itself, there is one or two people who are learning from Indira Gandhi University. They are still facing the stigma and discrimination, so stigma and discrimination has to be eliminated. For children who are below the age of 18, they have to talk about the gender sexuality issues beyond just good and bad touch. It's not about only sexual discrimination, sexual harassment of the children, but it is also about evolving children, about understanding, what could be the issues of sexuality and gender. The second thing is about you need to train the parents of the children because none of these parents understand sexuality and gender. So it is going after one to another. So I don't know about sexuality and gender. I can't teach my children. So when they become parents, they will not know, and they won't be able to teach the children. The other bigger flaw in the entire process is about whether teachers have gone through the sexuality and gender training or not. We must make them go through the sexuality and gender training. So if they find out any person, any trans children or a child who identifies as a gender variant, how will they treat them? That discussions have not happened yet within the educational system. There aren't any enough policies that safeguard the safety and the expression of a person. So what if a person who has been registered as a male in the educational system tomorrow decides to raise the hair? Will the school allow that thing to happen? We don't know, but that is something which we need to talk about. We must engage right now with young school. And I must tell you that right now a lot of transgenders are become HIV positive at the age of 15 and 16 because that is a time when they are out and open, vulnerable and having sexual activity as a part of experiment, as a part of rape or as a part of sex work. So this is a matter of concern at this point of time, and we must engage with children who are young on their sexuality and gender, and this is a major issue that we are right now working around. So thank you regarding that. Do we have any other question? I think everybody's saying thank you. Oh, one more question. What about okay, I forgot. Okay, Shweta from iTech India. What about media advocacy and partnership? Thank you, Shweta, for the question. Yes, media and advocacy is extremely important. We have been engaged with media for a long time. There are some sensitive people who understand the issues of media, but the problem is that the trans people are not being portrayed in media and Bollywood industry positively right now. You must be seeing a serial called as Shakti. I don't know, Shakti on Z or somewhere, I don't know which channel. And it's a story of a trans woman who married to a state man and what happens to her life and all those kind of things. That role has been portrayed by a cis woman. Why didn't you take a transgender actor? You think transgender people can't act? But they have not been given an opportunity. I appreciate for filmmakers to have such kind of a stories, but many times transgender people in media and in Bollywood industry have been shown as somebody who's a disruptive to the society. So you will get all the time news like in media. अरे इतने सारे किन्नर लोगों ने so many hijras have harassed people in the train. So many hijras have done something somewhere. So, but so many hijras have done so many good things about the society is not something talked about enough. Things are changing, media is changing, media is portraying trans people in a different way, in a different light. There are a lot of trans leaders, including various people. I mean, I don't want to name people, but Akai Padmashali, Revati, Priya Babu, Lakshnaran Tripathi, so many Reshma, Ranjita, Aryan Pasha, so many trans men, trans women, intersex people are coming out as what they are, and they are creating a huge amount of difference to the trans community in India, and that is something which is happening and that will keep happening, and that they need support. Mr. John is asking, do you have to make ICTC compulsory for him? For whom? ICTC for transgender people? I think ICTC cannot be compulsory. The basic principle of ICTC is that it is about voluntary testing. So people who identify themselves as at the risk must come to ICTC and get tested. But we can't single out a community that is so discriminatory. We can't say that all the trans people have to go through an ICTC or they have to get tested. They are encouraged to get tested, but whether we can force them to get tested is extremely wrong, and it is against the human right. So we can't say that, sir. But yes, we have to reach out to the communities more. We have to make them part of the health response. We have to educate them, and we have to educate them enough so that they understand that they are at the risk and they have to get tested. But that way everybody has to be tested, and none of us can make anybody compulsory for testing, right? We can't be judgmental about any community on their sexual behavior. Thank you. Any other question? No, thank you everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you. Divya, do we have any other questions? I can't see any questions. I mean, oh, one more, no more questions. Okay, Praveen is saying no more questions. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. I don't know how many people. I think my say 115 people attended this session, and I really appreciate all of you who are from various states, Vihan partners, AIT centers. On behalf of India HIV/AIDS Alliance, on behalf of ITEC, on behalf of Transgender Community, I really appreciate you guys took out some time and listened to my discussions. I'm really sorry I rushed so much on various slides and I didn't give enough time. 170 logins were there today. Okay, thank you, Divya. I appreciate. And as I mentioned to you, I'm repeating again, my email address is aaher@allianceindia.org, and my phone number is 9711170763. In case anybody wants to have any support, okay, I'm just putting my first slide so that all of you could get my contact information. And if you need any support implementing trans interventions in your state, in your cities, with the AIT centers, I'm more than happy to support. Thank you so much for your time. Divya, how do we go ahead with this? Can we just wind up now?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Abhina, for this informative and wonderful session today. And all the participants, thank you so much for patient listening. We will be sharing the recorded link and the presentation for today's session soon with all of you. All participants are requested to kindly enter the e-poll, which will be displayed on the screen shortly. Thank you, Abhina, once again. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the participants. Abhina, you can mute your mic and we can just
Yeah, I'm just saying if anybody has any feedback or something, I'm more than happy to get that. Thank you so much, Divya. I'm muting my mic.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.